What if I told you that in one battle, the average life expectancy of a Soviet soldier was just 24 hours? Not 24 days, not 24 weeks, 24 hours? Welcome to Stalingrad, where men didn't just fight a battle, they descended into a man-made hell that redefined what human beings could endure. This isn't the story of grand strategy or famous generals. This is the story of what happens when ordinary men are pushed beyond the breaking point of human existence. Welcome back to World War IIpedia, where we uncover the forgotten chapters of World War II. This video contains mature content including graphic descriptions of warfare and human suffering, intended for educational purposes and mature audiences only. Viewer discretion advised. It's February 2nd, 1943. Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus, the highest-ranking German officer ever captured alive, is surrendering what's left of his once mighty 6th Army to Soviet forces. Behind him lie the frozen corpses of over 200,000 German soldiers. This isn't just another World War II battle. This is the moment Hitler's war machine began its death spiral. Welcome to Stalingrad, the graveyard of the Third Reich. By 1941, Adolf Hitler thought he had it all figured out. We only have to kick in the door, he boasted about invading the Soviet Union, and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down. He expected to crush the Red Army in 6 weeks. Instead, by December, German forces were being thrown back from the gates of Moscow in the brutal Soviet winter counteroffensive. But Hitler had an even bigger problem brewing. Germany was running out of everything: food, metals, and most critically, oil. The industrial powerhouse of America had just entered the war, and Hitler knew his window was closing fast. He needed to finish off the Soviets quickly, and there was only one way to do it: capture the oil fields of the Southern Caucasus. This desperate gamble would lead to Operation Blue, the campaign that would culminate in the bloodiest battle of World War II. But here's the jaw-dropping truth: the Battle of Stalingrad was doomed before the first German soldier even set foot in the city. By summer 1942, Hitler's once massive invasion force was stretched paper-thin across a front line over 2,500 kilometers long. Army Group North was bogged down besieging Leningrad. Army Group Center was under constant attack near Rzhev. That left Army Group South with just 72 German divisions, about 1 million men, to execute what Hitler called his war-winning offensive. Operation Blue had multiple phases. First, break through Soviet lines and encircle enemy forces in eastern Ukraine. Then split in two. Army Group B would race to create a blocking line across the Don and Volga rivers, while Army Group A turned south toward the oil fields of Maikop and Grozny. On paper, it looked brilliant. In reality, it was a disaster waiting to happen. German logistics were already strained to the breaking point. The distances were vast, and Hitler didn't have enough German troops. He had to rely heavily on Romanian and Italian allies, forces that were poorly equipped and had low morale. They didn't even have the benefit of the famous German 88mm guns that had proven so effective against Soviet tanks. Most critically, Hitler had once again underestimated his enemy. The Soviets could field over 1 million more fighting troops than the Germans and were creating new air and tank armies constantly. And now here we are, inside the Stalingrad pocket. The conditions became hellish. Forget everything you think you know about World War II battles. Stalingrad wasn't fought with tanks rolling across open fields or planes dogfighting in clear skies. This was warfare stripped down to its most primitive, brutal core. Man against man, room by room, floor by floor, sometimes fighting over a single staircase for days. Picture this: you're a 19-year-old Soviet conscript. You've just been ferried across the Volga River under constant German fire. Many of your comrades drowned before reaching the other side. Not from enemy bullets, but from the sheer weight of their waterlogged clothing and weapons pulling them under the icy water. You've made it to the city, but here's what nobody told you. Statistically, you'll be dead before tomorrow's sunset. The Germans called it Rattenkrieg, the Rat War, and that's exactly what it was. Men living like rats in sewers, cellars, and bombed-out buildings, fighting with knives, bayonets, and sometimes just their bare hands when ammunition ran out. This wasn't warfare. This was survival horror on an industrial scale. When the German bombardment began on August 23, 1942, it didn't just destroy buildings, it created a landscape that belonged more in Dante's Inferno than on Earth. The city became a maze of twisted metal, collapsed concrete, and human remains. But here's the twisted irony. This destruction actually helped the defenders. Every pile of rubble became a fortress. Every destroyed building became a sniper's nest. The Germans, masters of blitzkrieg warfare, suddenly found themselves in an environment where their tanks were useless. Their air superiority meant nothing, and their tactical superiority evaporated in the smoke and dust. Soviet soldiers didn't just fight in this hellscape, they lived in it. They slept in basements filled with corpses. They ate rats when food ran out. They drank water contaminated with blood and debris, and they kept fighting. The civilians who remained, and Stalin had forbidden evacuation even of children, became part of this nightmare. Grandmothers operated machine guns. Teenagers served as snipers. Children as young as 12 carried ammunition through the sewers. This wasn't just a military battle. It was an entire population's fight for survival. What does it do to a man's mind when he knows he has a 24-hour life expectancy? Soviet reinforcements crossing the Volga weren't just facing death. They were walking into mathematical certainty of it. Yet they kept coming. Why? Part of it was Stalin's Order 227. Not one step backwards. Barrier troops with machine guns waited behind the front lines to shoot anyone who retreated. Desertion meant a one-way ticket to a penal battalion, which was essentially a death sentence with extra steps. But there was something deeper at work here. The soldiers developed what psychologists would later recognize as a form of collective madness. When death becomes so commonplace that it loses meaning, when the line between the living and the dead blurs in the smoke and rubble, men can push beyond normal human limits. They weren't fighting for Stalin or communism anymore. They were fighting because fighting was all they had left. German soldiers experienced their own psychological breakdown. These were men who had conquered most of Europe, who had seen themselves as members of a master race. Now they were reduced to scavenging for food, eating their own horses, and dying from diseases in frozen cellars. Their letters home, like those of Fritz Ludowitz, reveal men desperately clinging to humanity in an inhuman situation. Fritz married his fiancée by proxy in a bombed-out basement, perhaps knowing he'd never see her again. He was right. He was later reported missing, presumed dead. These weren't just military casualties. These were human tragedies multiplied by hundreds of thousands. In this urban nightmare, a new kind of warrior emerged, the sniper. This wasn't the romanticized version you see in movies. This was psychological warfare at its most personal and terrifying. Vasily Zaitsev, the most famous Soviet sniper with 225 confirmed kills, turned Stalingrad into his personal hunting ground. But he wasn't alone. Soviet snipers competed with each other, keeping score like it was a deadly game. The psychological impact on German soldiers was devastating. They became afraid to move during daylight, afraid to show themselves for even a second. Imagine being a German soldier in Stalingrad. You can't see your enemy, but you know he's watching. Every window could hide a rifle. Every pile of rubble could conceal death. You're not fighting an army. You're fighting ghosts who can kill you from 400 meters away without you ever knowing they were there. The Germans tried to counter with their own snipers, but they were fighting on the Soviets' terms now. This wasn't open warfare where German training and equipment gave them an advantage. This was intimate, personal killing where patience and desperation mattered more than technology. The fighting for Stalingrad's factories became legendary, but not for the reasons you might think. These weren't just strategic objectives. They became symbols of human endurance, pushed to its absolute limit. Workers in the tractor factory continued producing T-34 tanks, even as German shells fell around them. These tanks rolled off the production line unpainted, sometimes without gun sights, and drove straight into battle with factory workers as crews. Imagine that. Men who had been building tractors in the morning were fighting German panzers by afternoon. The factory districts became a three-dimensional battlefield. Germans might control the ground floor of a building, while Soviets held the second floor, with fighting rages floor by floor, room by room. Men fought with grenades in stairwells so narrow that the explosions would kill attackers and defenders alike. In the grain elevator, a handful of Soviet Marines held off German attacks for weeks. When the Germans finally took the building, they found the bodies of the defenders still at their posts, having fought literally to the last man. These weren't professional soldiers. Many were teenagers who had never seen combat before Stalingrad. As winter set in, Stalingrad became something beyond human comprehension. Temperatures dropped -22 degrees Fahrenheit. Men froze to death at their posts. Weapons jammed from the cold. The wounded died not from their injuries, but from exposure. But here's what's truly mind-bending. The fighting continued. Men with frostbitten fingers still pulled triggers. Soldiers with frozen feet still charged enemy positions. The human capacity for endurance in Stalingrad redefined what we thought possible. German soldiers, equipped for a quick summer campaign, suffered terribly. Their letters described men so cold they couldn't feel their hands, so hungry they fought over scraps of bread, so desperate they burned furniture from destroyed homes just to stay alive for another hour. Soviet soldiers, better equipped for winter warfare with quilted jackets and fur hats, still faced unimaginable hardships. They slept in holes in the ground, ate snow for water, and used the bodies of the dead as shields against the wind. The numbers from Stalingrad aren't just statistics. They're a catalog of human suffering on an unprecedented scale. Over 2 million casualties. That's not soldiers. That's human beings, each with families, dreams, fears, and hopes that were snuffed out in the rubble of one city. But the most shocking statistic isn't about the enemy killing each other. It's about what they did to their own. The Soviets deliberately executed 14,000 of their own soldiers for cowardice or un-Soviet behavior. That's 2 or 3 entire divisions shot by their own side. These weren't traitors or deserters. These were men who had simply reached the breaking point of human endurance. The civilian cost was equally staggering. 40,000 to 45,000 civilians died in the fighting. These weren't military casualties. These were grandparents, parents, children who were caught in a battle that consumed everything in its path. German prisoners faced their own hell. Of the 200,000 who went into Soviet captivity, only a handful would ever see home again. They died of starvation, disease, and exposure in camps that were barely more humane than the battle they had just survived. By January 1943, the German Sixth Army wasn't an army anymore. It was a collection of starving, freezing, disease-ridden men who had been pushed beyond the limits of human endurance. When Field Marshal Paulus finally surrendered on February 2nd, 1943, it wasn't a military decision. It was an act of mercy. The men under his command weren't soldiers anymore. They were human wreckage, broken by an experience that had stripped away everything that made them human, except the will to survive. The surrender itself was surreal. Hitler had promoted Paulus to field marshal, expecting him to commit suicide rather than be captured. No German field marshal had ever been taken alive. But Paulus refused. After what he had witnessed, after what his men had endured, the old codes of military honor seemed meaningless. Stalingrad changed warfare forever, but not in the way most people think. It proved that human beings, when pushed to their absolute limits, are capable of enduring and inflicting suffering beyond imagination. It showed that in the right circumstances, ordinary people can become capable of extraordinary brutality and extraordinary heroism, sometimes simultaneously. The battle created a new understanding of what war could be, not the clean, strategic chess game that generals planned, but a descent into primal savagery where survival trumped everything else. The men who fought at Stalingrad, on both sides, were never the same. Those who survived carried psychological scars that would last lifetimes. But perhaps most importantly, Stalingrad proved that there are some things worth dying for, and some things worth living through hell to defend. In a city where the average life expectancy was 24 hours, men chose to keep fighting not because they were ordered to, but because surrender meant something worse than death. It meant that their suffering had been meaningless. The Battle of Stalingrad wasn't just the turning point of World War II. It was the moment when humanity looked into the abyss of its own capacity for both destruction and endurance, and somehow found the strength to keep fighting. In the frozen hell of a Russian city, ordinary men discovered they were capable of extraordinary things. both terrible and magnificent.